Welcome back. Right now, I'm very excited to have the newly appointed Utah Poet Laureate right here in our studios. Lisa Bickmore is here with us today. She has a vision for the future, goals, plans, and she has a great resume leading up to her experience as Poet Laureate. Thank you for being here today, Lisa.
It's absolutely my pleasure.
So I'd love to hear a little bit about your background and what made you decide to want to be the Poet Laureate here in Utah.
That's okay. So I wanted to be a poet when I was pretty young. You know, I remember studying poets when I was in high school. So I loved Robert Frost. I loved Gerard Manley Hopkins. And so I wrote poetry from the time I was a teenager. And I kept going with that and had plenty of well-deserved rejections. And then I was able to put together a book of poems, and my first book, Haste, which was published by Signature Books. And from there, I just kept on writing. And it was, you know, one of the things I think about writing is that it has to be intrinsically worth it to you, or because the rewards are intermittent and unpredictable. And so for me, writing is its own reward. And I've been lucky also, you know, to have some recognition and opportunities, and then to be affiliated with so many great writers. So, you know, when the Poet Laureate program was first started in Utah, I was a citizen of Utah, and so I got to see all the Poets Laureate. It's a way of honoring poetry and people's different accomplishments, and all the Poets Laureate are, in the past, have been quite different from each other, but all of them really estimable and stellar in terms of their own writing. And then increasingly the Poets Laureate have tried to serve the writers in Utah by highlighting other people's achievements and work and creating opportunities for them to connect with each other and so on. That's inspiring to me. And so I thought I'd like to try if that opportunity comes around to me. And recognizing there's so many great poets in Utah that if it wasn't my turn, it would probably be in great hands. So that's kind of my background.
Now, you mentioned that as a teenager you started writing poetry. Do you remember when you were first captivated by a poem, or that moment where you knew you wanted to write poetry?
I had a great teacher in high school, and he had us read more poetry, I think, than some high school English students read, because not everybody's comfortable reading poetry, and that's something I think all poets would like to expand. So I do remember reading T.S. Eliot, and as I said, Gerard Manley Hopkins. I had a Mormon Sunday school teacher who handed me the name of Gerard Manley Hopkins, and that really got me going. I think by the time I started studying in college, I mentioned Robert Frost, and I still love Frost and his ability to use form in such a natural way. And I studied Elizabeth Bishop in college, the poet Elizabeth Bishop, and her work. There's a poem of hers called Crusoe in England, where she tells the story of Robinson Crusoe after he is saved from his island exile, and it's just this magnificent poem where she imagines what it would be like to come back to, you know, rules and a sort of a extremely formal society and so on. Anyway, that poem.
You know, you speak so beautifully of great works that have influenced you, incredible teachers, and you've had the opportunity to teach at many great institutions here across our state. Do you feel that those early experiences really made you want to teach?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one time my son said once that he's a soccer coach. He wanted to give the gift of soccer to kids that was given to him. And that's kind of, I think, a good teacher wants that, right? To help new people experience what they found beautiful and mind expanding and soul expanding about the study of literature. And it's not always easy, right? Because what you love about a thing can help, it opens it up for you, but it doesn't necessarily open it up for everybody else. you always have to find your own way in. But I think creating a threshold over which people can step into literature is a really great goal as a teacher. So for me, teaching poetry is partly about helping people discover all the resources of language that help you write poems, paying attention to the sounds of words as well as their meanings, and how you create images and figures of speech, metaphors out of language, all of those things. It's like once that's unlocked for you, how you experience language really changes. And I think even if you never wrote a poem yourself, like experiencing that and the way that that opens up language it's enormous.
And you've written books of poetry, published those. How do you categorize your poems that you write?
Yeah. I love the singing sound of language. So, and I love that sort of moment of stillness in language that can be a song. There's a critic, I think it was J. Hillis Miller, who said that poetry, lyric poetry, is song but overheard. So I mean, I think of that as a kind of ideal. So I do think of myself as a lyric poet. I also have elements of narrative in at least some of my poems. The poet Gail Ronsky once talked about how every lyric poem has a buried narrative. And so, like, trying to help people access the story that's in your poem while also sort of really intensifying language. That's the kind of poet I am. I hope.
It seems that over the past couple of years, Poet Laureate has gotten a little more attention nationwide. Do you feel that people understand more about what a Poet Laureate does, about the goals, because the national spotlight with other poets such as Amanda Gorman have really come more on poetry? Do you think it's made it a bit more accessible to people?
I hope so. I watched the inauguration of Joe Biden and heard Amanda Gorman deliver her poem and was so moved by it, partly because of her youth and partly because she's clearly a really gifted speaker of her own poems, and also just because the hope that and the struggle both, are sort of in those words. I think a lot of people were captured and captivated by her. The newest Poet Laureate at the national level, Ada Limon, is another example of a poet that I think people you can read her works. You don't have to be sort of erudite, and that is not to dismiss anything about her poems. They're available to readers. And I think the same about Joy Harjo, who was the Poet Laureate before Ada Limon. Both of them are just the kind of poets that could be almost shaman or shaw women, I don't know if that's a word, for a nation in a way. So yes, I do think so. I do think that the Poet Laureate at all levels sort of aims to make poetry more visible, more understandable, more lovable, and also to promote, what poetry is and does and the work of other writers.
And I only have a few moments left, but I know you have some goals and objectives for your time as Poet Laureate. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, so the previous Poet Laureate, Paisley Reckdahl, who I think has done the most wonderful job, aimed to begin to build on a literary community through a poetry festival and through her website, Mapping Literary Utah. My goal is to begin what I'm calling a mobile micropress, which is to create small-scale publications for writers across the state, and to identify writing groups and writing communities where those publications might sort of begin. And I have some experience with book arts, and myself, I'm a pretty new publisher in the independent literary publishing world, and I have experience from my work at Salt Lake Community College and doing small-scale publications. So I'm really excited about this because I think publication is a wonderful sort of epitome of one's work, the ability to share it, and so on. So a mobile micropress and then an archive of the things that this little micropress publishes.
Oh, I'm very excited about that. How can we get more information about your post as Poet Laureate and about what you're doing?
So the Utah Division of Arts and Museums has a Poet Laureate webpage that gives a little bio about me, and it also there's a sheet where you can, or a form where you can sign up for a Poet Laureate visit or appearance. And you know, I have a website, lisabickmore.com.
Well, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here. I can see why they chose you. You speak so beautifully of poetry.
Thank you so much.
And of how it affects you and your poems. So very excited to watch everything you're doing for this micropress, all these great things that are happening. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Christine.
We are going to take a quick break right here on Park State Television and be back right after this.